Chapter 991. An ancient and mysterious hymn sounded from the altar. The believers looked at the indistinct green-robed figure on the altar with pious eyes. In the eyes of the believers, who could not possibly come into contact with God, the oracle was the closest person to God. The hymn ended. The entire square fell into silence. Everyone held their breaths, waiting for a miracle to happen. Gu Shengyin lowered his head slightly and glanced at the crowd below. The tens of thousands of people all did the same thing. They crossed their hands in front of their foreheads, hoping that the God they believed in would look after them. She smiled, and then, her figure suddenly changed. In everyone's eyes, even those who couldn't see clearly with their eyes, they could clearly see the figure on the altar that was very far away from them. Her golden hair quickly grew and soon reached her ankles. The green robe on her body changed, and the green leaf embroidery on the robe sparkled. Her eyes became emerald green, and an indescribable gorgeous crown appeared on her forehead. In her hand, she held a golden scepter. Her face was beautiful and exquisite, but it could not stay in anyone's mind for even a second. Gu Shengyin's green eyes, which seemed to contain everything in the world, slowly swept through the crowd below. Being stared at by such a gaze, everyone had an impulse to prostrate themselves in worship. "Greetings, my believers." A voice as cool as water slowly brushed past everyone's eardrums. "God." Like a tide, everyone knelt down with fanatical expressions. The gods had actually heard their calls and had descended upon them. At this moment, no one doubted that the person standing on the altar was a god. With such dignity, with such a gaze, how could she not be a god? Even Phoebe could not resist following her instincts and unwillingly knelt down in front of Gu Shengyin. Then, she felt the gaze of the gods fall on her. Phoebe did not dare to look up. She was a bit excited, and did not know what God wanted to say to her. She felt that she could immediately declare that next year, no, starting tomorrow, she would build more Goddess of Nature temples in the Roth Empire and continue to pass down the faith of the goddess. The Goddess of Nature spoke, "Ruler of the Roth Empire, why do you not treat your people well?" "What?" Phoebe was stunned. The Goddess of Nature continued, "Every day, I see the poor without clothes on their bodies, hear the cries of babies, and wanderers begging for a place to stay. Ruler of the Roth Empire, you are making your people suffer." Phoebe only felt a huge divine power descending on her body. Her face became pale, and she could fall to the ground at any time. But she still insisted, "They are just a few lowly commoners, God, how can you doubt me because of them?" "Lowly commoners?" The voice of the Goddess of Nature resounded throughout the Roth Empire. "In my eyes, there is no such thing as wealth or poverty. Those who believe in me are my people." Many people had tears in their eyes because of this sentence. Yes, they were not lower than anyone else. At least in the eyes of the gods, they were not inferior to anyone else. Phoebe felt a chill all over her body. Then, he heard God's indifferent voice, "Phoebe is unworthy of being the emperor of the Roth Empire." Seeing the chapter number of 1008, she had the urge to write 10,086. Chapter 992. The moment Fibbit heard this, other than anger, his heart surged with even more ridicule. Did she really think that she could decide everything just because she was a god? Whether or not he could become the emperor of the Roth Empire was decided by a single word from her. But when he raised his head and looked around, his heart went cold. The commoners that he had always looked down upon were now looking at him with hatred and hatred. The nobles who had received countless rewards from him were also looking at him with strange gazes. It was as if he was a person who had been reprimanded by the gods, and if they got too close to him, it would be a sin. He turned around in a daze and found that even his personal gods had silently distanced themselves from him. A single word from the gods had caused him to be deserted. Was this the power of faith? He thought bitterly. Could it be considered that he had lifted a rock and smashed it on his own foot? Gu Shengyin didn't say anything else. As a god, she only needed to express her attitude. Her long hair returned to its original appearance, and the scepter and crown disappeared at the same time. In an instant, Gu Shengyin returned to the appearance everyone was familiar with. Everyone knew that the gods had left. Next, the oracle would choose the lucky ones to bless, and this ceremony could be considered to have been completed successfully. As soon as the gods left, Fibbit stood up in a flustered and exasperated manner. Men! He looked around and shouted angrily. Pointing at the altar and the shrine, Zhong Xian said, "Tear these things down. Don't mislead others with your lies. Slander this emperor." He was so angry that he stomped his feet, but the guards behind him all looked at each other, and no one dared to move. What a joke! How could they dare to tear down the place where the gods had just descended? Not to mention, most of the guards were believers of the goddess of nature. Gu Xingyi's words just now had already caused Fibbit, the emperor's authority in their hearts, to drop to a freezing point. But Fibbit still wanted to court death. The goddess of nature had just finished her descent, and when the believers were at their most emotional, he clamored to tear down the temple. Didn't he see that the believers had already spontaneously blocked in front of the temple? Fibbit's heart was ruthless as he said sternly, "Can't you hear my orders? Tear it down. Whoever dares to stop you will be killed without mercy." There were still a few trusted subordinates of the emperor who didn't have any faith who stepped forward. Seeing the rest of the civilians using their own bodies to shield themselves, their eyes flashed with cruelty as they raised the swords in their hands high. Fear flashed across the faces of the commoners, but their bodies did not move. This was the place of the gods, and they could not be allowed to destroy it. Gu Xingyi's heart skipped a beat when she saw this. Did he really think that she was dead? Just as the soldier's sword was about to fall, a bolt of lightning suddenly descended from the sky and struck straight at him. Not even his bones remained. Gu Xingyi used this move to intimidate them. She had also used her blood to prove that the goddess of nature was not without a temper. It's a divine punishment. The gods will not abandon us. The believers all knelt down in excitement at this scene, murmuring praises to the goddess of nature. Phoebe returned to the palace with an ashen face. However, things weren't over yet. Phoebe, who had just returned to the palace, received the news. Grand Duke Royd had rebelled. There were still 2 more chapters. Asterisk 3. Epsilon asterisk. Monthly votes, don't stop. Chapter 993. Fibbit ordered the Empire's army to fight. The result could be imagined. One side had been preparing for a long time, and the other side had been fighting in a hurry. One side's morale was strong, and the other side had just been abandoned by the gods. The Empire's army was retreating in defeat. What was even more infuriating was that the people of the Empire were not angry at the rebels at all when they heard the news. They maintained a rare silence, and they were even happy to see such a situation. After all, the current emperor was someone who had been reprimanded by the gods themselves. At the beginning, Phoebe was still furious, and the atmosphere was extremely tense. But now, he had begun to feel powerless and afraid. His brother's army was coming over aggressively. His army was retreating in defeat, and they were about to reach the imperial city. At that time, he would have no way out. "Duke, there's a messenger from the imperial city." Royd was sitting in the camp in his military uniform. He gestured for his subordinates to bring the person up. The messenger's legs were a little weak in the face of the murderous soldiers. He took out the letter in his hand in trepidation. It was Fibbit's handwritten letter. The letter described the sincere feelings between the 2 brothers very sincerely. He was very sad about Royd's actions. He also said that as long as Royd was willing to turn back and admit his mistakes, he would definitely let bygones be bygones and was willing to rule the empire with him. Royd read it expressionlessly and threw it to his confidant. "My brother, the emperor, is still putting on the airs of an emperor." Louis read it at a glance and was a little speechless in his heart. His Majesty's brain didn't seem to be very clear. At this time, he still couldn't recognize the situation. Let bygones be bygones? Did he really think that the initiative was still in his hands? Royd looked at the messenger coldly. "Go back and tell His Majesty Emperor Fibbit that Royd thanks him for his good intentions. We'll meet in the imperial city." This was a clear rejection. The messenger wiped the sweat on his forehead and went out. The aura of this duke was too strong. He looked at him coldly, and he really thought that the other party would behead him in the next moment. Fortunately, he managed to keep his life. But the duke's reply. The messenger thought about His Majesty's temper and deeply felt that if he replied like this, he was afraid that he would lose his little life that he had painstakingly saved. He pondered for a moment. Since his wife and children were in his hometown, why not take advantage of this opportunity to escape and return home to avoid trouble? With that thought in mind, the horsewhip in his hand subconsciously changed direction, and the horse galloped in the opposite direction of the imperial city. In the palace, Phoebe did not receive a reply. He would never have thought that it was his messenger who ran away because he was afraid of angering him. He would think that Roy didn't accept his suggestion and killed the messenger. Damn it! Damn it! Refusing a toast only to drink a forfeit. I've already taken a step back, yet he's still not satisfied. Phoebe paced back and forth in the palace. He was annoyed, and another set of new tea sets on the table was scrapped. The maids lowered their heads and kept quiet out of fear. They were afraid that His Majesty's anger would spread to them if he was unhappy. Fortunately, Phoebe was not in the mood to find trouble with these maids. He watched as time passed day by day. When Royd's army finally arrived outside the imperial city, Phoebe could no longer sit still. Chapter 994. Royd received a letter from his elder brother. This time, the emperor, who thought highly of himself, finally put down his pride and spoke with a pleading tone. But Royd didn't want to talk to him anymore. 2 days later, Phoebe sat in the palace. Beside him were his only trusted subordinates. His wife and children were killed by him, and most of the maids in the palace had run away. In his current situation, he could be considered a loner. Royd, my brother. When he saw Royd, he actually wasn't as hysterical and angry as he had imagined. This made Royd raise his eyebrows. It seems that his brother wasn't completely useless. At least he could still maintain his composure in this situation. Phoebe silently stared at him for a while, then suddenly smiled strangely. Royd, you must be very proud of yourself right now, right? He said. Royd didn't say anything. Phoebe didn't want an answer either. He just continued, I'm telling you, Royd, don't be proud. I didn't lose to you, and don't think you have everything under control. If it wasn't for the goddess of nature's words that made my people stop supporting me, do you think you could have easily conquered the palace? So what if you've taken the throne? This is no longer the era of imperial power. As long as that high and mighty god says a word, you can be like me, falling from your high and mighty position into the dust. He laughed in schadenfreude, his eyes flashing as if he could already see Lloyd's miserable future like his. Royd didn't answer his question. Seeing that Royd didn't care, Phoebe just smiled. Blood flowed out from his mouth. He laughed loudly and sat on the high throne, losing his breath. Duke. A subordinate who came with Royd carefully asked him what to do. Royd looked away and said, Clean it up and give it a proper burial. While everyone was cheering and organizing the spoils of war, Royd came to St. Vitus Square alone. The goddess of nature's temple here was the largest temple in the entire Roth Empire. He walked through countless devout believers and went straight to the back. There was someone waiting for him. You're here? Gu Shengyin stood in the garden and turned around when she heard the noise. She didn't seem surprised at all to see him and smiled. Seeing her, Royd felt his chaotic thoughts calm down at once. A power that came from the bottom of his heart urged him to quicken his steps and walk to the woman's side. Then, under her surprised gaze, he hugged her. He sighed in satisfaction, his heart completely calmed down. Gu Shengyin turned her head and looked at the man who rarely showed such weak emotions. She didn't say anything and quietly waited for him to recover himself. After a long while, Royd released her and looked at Gu Shengyin. Now that Phoebe is dead, this empire belongs to you and me, he said. Bais, do you want this empire? He asked. Gu Shengyin suddenly raised her head to look at the man. Lloyd looked at her openly, not holding back a single shred of his emotions. It wasn't a test, nor was it a trap. He was seriously asking her this question. If I say yes, what will you do? Gu Shengyin raised her eyebrows and asked. End of chapter 10. Gao Lengji was forced to go to sleep. Good night, everyone. Remember to vote for me before you go to sleep. Chapter 995. Then I'll give it to you. Her gaze trembled when she heard those words. Her casual expression turned serious. Royd, do you know what you're saying? Royd didn't listen to her. He just said, you have a high support rate among the people. There won't be any obstacles in this aspect. As for my soldiers, I can completely restrain them. No one will raise any objections. He was actually seriously analyzing the feasibility of this matter. Gu Shengyin laughed. I'm just joking, Royd. Royd looked straight at her. As long as it's something you say, I won't treat it as a joke. His gaze was firm. When he looked at Gu Shengyin, his eyes inadvertently revealed a trace of gentleness. Gu Shengyin had a bright smile on her face. She reached out and took Royd's hand. I'll take you to a place. Before Royd could say anything, he found that the scene around him had suddenly changed. He was still in the Goddess of Nature temple in St. Vita Square a second ago, but the next moment, he was in a completely unfamiliar place. This place was very big. Everywhere was bright. The floor was paved with white jade. It was clean and bright, without a single flaw. The walls were inlaid with fist-sized pearls. These pearls emitted a soft light, illuminating everything in this place. Above his head were lifelike murals. The most eye-catching thing was the luxurious and perfect throne at the end of the hall. Royd felt that even the most magnificent palace he had ever seen in his life couldn't compare to this place. Moreover, this place gave him a familiar feeling. It was as if he had seen it somewhere before. Where had he seen it before? He pondered carefully. Suddenly, his gaze froze. In the records of the Goddess of Nature, there were some descriptions of the Goddess of Nature's temple. He used to think that it was a human's imagination of the gods. But now, looking at it again, he found that it was very similar. No matter how calm a person was, when they knew that they might have come to a place where the gods lived in legends, they would feel unrealistic. He turned his head and looked at Gu Shengyin, who had been silent all this time. This is... Gu Shengyin nodded. That's right, this is the shrine of the Goddess of Nature. There were many Goddess of Nature temples in the Roth Empire. But Royd knew that this Goddess of Nature temple wasn't built by humans. He was puzzled. Why did you bring me here? Wait, how did you bring me here? As far as he knew, even the most favored believer of the gods could only obtain the qualification to enter the divine realm after death. How could Bess bring someone like him, who was not even a believer of the Goddess of Nature, here? Gu Shengyin smiled. I brought you here to tell you something. Her appearance began to change significantly. Her long hair had lengthened, and her appearance and clothes had undergone tremendous changes. Royd looked at the scene in shock until the scepter that symbolized divine authority appeared in the other party's hand. He couldn't help but take a step back. He looked at this familiar yet completely unfamiliar woman in confusion. He could still see a trace of Bess on her face, but it was even more exquisite and perfect than Bess. Although those dark green eyes were still clear, there were too many things in them. This kind of Bess made Royd feel unfamiliar. Chapter 996. You. He opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. This development caught him off guard. The lover he was familiar with had completely changed. Everything in front of him told him that the Bess in his heart was just an illusion. The person in front of him, her true identity, combining her appearance and the place he was in, Royd spat out a word with difficulty. Goddess of Nature? He was a little confused. Even though his mind was firm, everything that had just happened was still beyond his expectations. Gu Shengyin sighed slightly. Royd, it's me. The indifferent divinity in her eyes quietly faded away, and the pair of green eyes revealed the gentleness and affection that Royd was familiar with. All of this, what's going on? Royd tried his best to calm himself down and asked. No matter what, he had to find out. Gu Shengyin waved her hand, and the two of them changed places. This was a huge garden, and there were exquisite tables and chairs beside them. "Sit down, Royd. I'll tell you slowly," Gu Shengyin said. Royd sat down, and Gu Shengyin picked up the crystal pot on the table for him to drink. The goddess of nature personally poured something for him. Royd thought absent-mindedly, not many people have enjoyed this honor, right? Gu Shengyin slowly told him some things. In the end, she said, "Royd, you heard it. I didn't come to the human world to lie to you." Royd opened his mouth. He really wanted to ask, "Then what about the things that happened between us all these years? Bis likes me, but what about the goddess of nature?" Looking at her, he didn't ask in the end. Gu Shengyin, however, saw through his thoughts. She took the initiative to reach out and gently placed her hand on Royd's. "Then, Royd, are you willing to accept a lover who has changed her identity?" Royd looked up at her. Her face had changed a lot. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't even be able to see any resemblance between her and the human world. Only the familiar gentleness in her eyes was the same as before. This was his Bis. This knowledge calmed Royd down. Yes, so what if she was the goddess of nature? She was just his Bis. Of course, my goddess. He turned his hand and held her hand tightly in his embrace. Gu Shengyin smiled. "The name Bizi is just my alias in the human world. Lloyd, call me Bizi." Catrice. In the divine language, it symbolized nature and beauty. This was a title unique to the goddess of nature. Even in the era of glory, only the four lords were qualified to call out this name. But now, there was an ordinary human. Ca. Fussy. Lloyd called out the name clumsily. Gu Shengyin felt as though she had sensed something. She could clearly feel the passion and love in Royd's heart when he called out her name. The name of a deity had many meanings, especially when it came to the realm of the goddess of nature. Her name could not be said casually, because she could sense everything. "And now, Royd, I can answer your question. Do you still think I want the Roth Empire?" Gu Shengyin asked with a smile. Royd only held her hand tighter. "Then you can be my empress, Catrice." Chapter 997. The Empire's Grand Duke Royd led his army into the imperial city. Grand Duke Royd became the new emperor. Grand Duke Royd, now His Majesty Royd, went to the Saint Vitus Goddess of Nature Temple on the first day of his ascension to the throne. In front of all the believers, he proposed to the oracle Bes, who was in the middle of answering the believers' questions. More importantly, Goddess Bes said yes. The citizens of the Roth Empire thought that the recent news was getting more and more explosive. They accepted the fact that the Roth Empire had a new ruler. After all, the previous emperor was reprimanded by God himself. Moreover, under the previous emperor's orders, the lives of the citizens were very difficult. After working hard for a year, they didn't even have enough food to eat. In their hearts, no matter how bad things were in the future, it couldn't be worse than now. As for what happened after that, the citizens were even more relieved. Being recognized by the goddess meant that the new emperor was also recognized by God. Royd held a grand wedding ceremony for his empress. On the day of the wedding, countless citizens gathered in front of the imperial palace to give their blessings to their emperor and empress. Standing on the high city walls, Royd looked down at the passionate citizens and said helplessly, "Your popularity seems to be much higher than mine." Gu Shengyin looked at him with a smile. "These people are all my believers. What do you think?" Royd replied seriously, "I am also your believer." Yes, ever since he knew that Bes was the goddess of nature, Royd had become the most loyal believer. In terms of faith, no one was more firm than him. With a smile on her face, Gu Shengyin looked up at the sky. In an instant, countless petals fell from the sky and covered the entire St. Vitus city in a rain of petals. This was the goddess of nature's blessing for the newlyweds. Countless believers began to pray. The relationship between His Majesty's Empress was very good. Many of Royd's confidants were worried that the Empress, as the goddess of nature's oracle, had a very high reputation in the Roth Empire. If the Empress had any thoughts of rebellion, it would be a disaster for the Roth Empire. Some even suggested that His Majesty slowly weakened the goddess of nature's faith in the empire. Not only did Royd ignore these comments, he even took the lead and openly declared that he was also the goddess of nature's most loyal believer. The power of God reached its peak in this era. However, the people approved of such an emperor, and the Empress had always stood by his side. Emperor Royd had a very high reputation among the people, so much so that any of his decrees did not need the empire to enforce them. The people would naturally follow him. The goddess of nature's faith had reached its peak. This era was called the Glorious Rise by later historians, which meant that the glorious era that had disappeared was slowly awakening. During the Age of Glory, under the influence of the Roth Empire, some countries began to slowly regain their lost faith. A smile appeared on Gu Shengyin's face as he sensed the awakening of the sleeping gods. Their spirits was their soul's awakened gods. These gods would never be forgotten by their people. Chapter 998. Gu Shengyin had stayed in that world for many, many years. It had been so long that even she could not remember it clearly. She had stayed with Lloyd in the human world for decades, and then Lloyd had been accompanying her in the godly realm. Knowing the vicissitudes of life, humans had been moving forward. When the light of the gods could not overcome the cold light of machines, Gu Shengyin felt the faith in her body slowly flowing away, and she knew that another cycle had ended. She let the temple begin to collapse, and fell into a deep sleep with Lloyd. Gu Shengyin opened her eyes in the space once again, and a trace of joy flashed across her eyes. The experience of the goddess of nature in this life had given her a great understanding of the laws of nature. Her hand paused, and the little emerald bird appeared in her palm out of thin air. Then, it blinked its pitch-black eyes and chirped twice at her. It flapped its little wings, and although it was difficult, it still relied on itself to fly. The system exclaimed, "Host, you've made great progress this time." Gu Shengyin smiled slightly. "It can only live for 2 days. I won't be able to see it when I return from the next mission." Although she said that, she was very satisfied in her heart. As for creation, she had already grasped the essence of it. Now, she only lacked enough power. Her understanding of the mysteries was enough, but her own strength was not enough for her to bear the burden of creating a complete life. As for power, system, arrange for me to enter the next mission world. The power she needed was the soul energy that the world gave back to her every time she completed a mission. Where was this? Gu Shengyin felt that her surroundings were foggy, and her soul seemed to be restricted by something. This feeling was very uncomfortable. System, transfer the world's plot. Yes, host. Gu Shengyin had already gotten used to the dizziness that came with the transfer of memories. This kind of feeling could no longer make her frown. She quickly organized the memories of this world in her mind. This was obviously the story of a selfless senior and an ungrateful wretch. The female lead, Shi Ling Shi, was originally a powerful cultivator in the tribulation stage 10,000 years ago. She was a famous fairy in the cultivation world. 10,000 years ago, the world of cultivation welcomed a great calamity, which was later called the Age of Chaos. In that great calamity, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth suddenly disappeared rapidly. Those self-cultivators who relied on spiritual energy to cultivate fell in realms one by one. Their youthful faces instantly became haggard, and their long lifespans shortened overnight. Cultivators died in large batches. Even the tribulation stage powerhouses who stood at the top were not spared. At that time, Shi Ling Shi felt the spiritual energy in her body rapidly disappearing. She knew that if this continued, she would inevitably end up like the other cultivators and die a miserable death. She gritted her teeth and made a risky decision. He extracted his own soul and injected it into the spiritual artifact, making himself an existence similar to an artifact spirit. If they were lucky, they would be able to escape this calamity and have a chance to make a comeback. If they were unlucky, they would be reduced to ashes. Shi Ling Shi did not ask for an afterlife. She only wanted to fight for the last chance of survival. She succeeded. She sealed her own soul in her purple heaven ring. When the spiritual energy disappeared, she fell into a deep sleep, waiting for the next time to wake up. She did not expect that she would wait for 10,000 years. We know that in many Xuanhuan and Xiuzhen novels, the main character has a powerful cheat, and the female lead is now that cheat. See you tonight, and while you're at it, I'll ask for your monthly votes. Chapter 999. After the Age of Doom, the ancient cultivation world was almost wiped out. Those precious cultivation methods and ancient cave abodes had all disappeared without a trace. It wasn't until a few thousand years later that the spiritual qi of heaven and earth slowly overflowed again, that cultivation slowly recovered. However, after losing the brilliant geniuses of the antiquity times and the precious legacies of the sects, the cultivation world of today was completely different from that of the antiquity times. In the cultivation world, cultivators were divided into qi refinement, foundation establishment, golden core, nascent soul, incarnation, combination, and tribulation transcendence. 7 major realms. In the ancient times, there were countless high-level cultivators. In other words, nascent soul cultivators were everywhere, and golden core cultivators were like dogs. Only those who reached the soul formation stage were qualified to be called high-level cultivators. But now, foundation establishment cultivators were considered the backbone of a sect, golden core cultivators could become sect elders, and nascent soul cultivators were like patriarchs in an ordinary sect. There were very few soul formation cultivators, and the only combination cultivator in the entire cultivation world was the sword sect's grand elder. As for tribulation transcendence, they only existed in legends. Shi Ling Shi was picked up by a girl named Jojo. Jojo was the daughter of a Chao family in Dongyun City. The Chao family could be considered a famous cultivation family in Dongyun City, but this daughter of the legal wife, Jojo's cultivation aptitude was even worse than that of a concubine's. In a world where martial arts were respected, one could imagine what kind of treatment she would receive with such talent. Ridicule, sarcasm, and disregard. The most likely outcome was that after she grew up, she would be married off to a talented disciple from a side branch by the family to win over people's hearts. Shi Ling Shi's purple heaven ring was picked up by Jojo and bound with her blood. Although Shi Ling Shi disliked this girl's extremely poor aptitude, she still did her best to teach her cultivation methods and refine spiritual medicine to improve her foundation. She only had one request. After Jojo became strong, she would find several very precious medicinal herbs for her to help her refine her body. What did Jojo say at that time? He swore to the heavens that he would go through water and tread on fire to find what Senior wanted. But what was the result? Jojo became more and more powerful. Her beauty, self-confidence, and reputation as a peerless genius spread throughout the cultivation world. Even a few outstanding young geniuses in the cultivation world prostrated themselves before her. Shi Ling Shi didn't care about this kind of thing. When she was in the cultivation world, her reputation as the Jinghong fairy attracted countless admirers. However, Jojo's heart had grown bigger. The more she interacted with the senior in the ring, the more she felt that he was mysterious and powerful. Everything he had now was given to him by her. It was hard to imagine how powerful Senior was when she was at her peak. Wait for such a powerful senior to regain his strength? By then, who would be able to see Jojo's brilliance? At first, she really wanted to repay this senior, but later on, her thoughts slowly changed. In the end, she didn't know where she got an ancient cultivation method from. Soul devouring. Devouring other people's souls, one could obtain the other party's soul power, and one's strength would be greatly enhanced. The more powerful the soul devoured, the more benefits the caster could obtain. Jojo shifted her gaze to Shi Ling Shi in the ring. Chapter 1000. If such a mysterious and powerful soul could devour her, once such a thought arose, it could not be erased. Unbeknownst to Shi Ling Shi, the junior she had treated with all her heart was already plotting against her. When the entire purple heaven ring was thrown into the furnace, Shi Ling Shi was still in disbelief. The purple heaven ring had cast a spell on her and she was trapped in it, unable to escape. She was tortured and roasted for 49 days. Her soul energy was weakened to the lowest point, and her spiritual consciousness was destroyed. The purest soul energy was devoured by Jojo. What happened after that was needless to say. Jojo's original constitution had been transformed by Shi Ling Shi into a genius who was extremely suitable for cultivation. She also cultivated with the high-grade techniques provided by Shi Ling Shi. In a few hundred years, she successfully entered the ranks of the top experts in the cultivation world and stood at the peak. No one knew that an ancient tribulation stage cultivator had once come to this world. According to the original plan, after Shi Ling Shi successfully condensed her physical body, she would use her identity as a tribulation stage cultivator to establish a sect and pass down some of the powerful techniques and cultivation methods of the ancient times. The entire cultivation world would be shaken because of this, and the overall strength of the cultivation world would increase greatly. However, everything was ruined by Jojo. Gu Shengyin came back to her senses. She was now under the ancestral hall of the Qiao family's main residence. She had just woken up from a deep sleep. Of course, she had just slept for 10,000 years, and her soul energy was very weak. That was why she felt very uncomfortable under the pressure of the ring. If she did not find someone to form a contract with as soon as possible, her soul origin would be damaged due to her weakness. This was also an important reason why Shi Ling Shi was so anxious to form a contract with Jojo. Gu Shengyin calmed down and said to the system, "Draw skills." This was a trap. The skills of the blood clan in the previous world were of little value. There was no possibility of using them at all. Gu Shengyin thought silently. "I hope I'll be lucky this time." Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining voice actor Itsu Qingzhou's voice-changing skill. Gu Shengyin, not only do I want to say, hee, I also want to throw it in the system's face. She was from a cultivation world, yet she had such a useless skill. This system was actually flashing a black light. The system said, "Host, the system will not take the blame for this. This is a random skill, it has nothing to do with one's character." Gu Shengyin proudly expressed that she did not want to talk to the system today. After complaining for a while, they returned to the main topic. At this time, Jojo was only 12 years old. She was still the young lady who had no sense of existence in the Qiao family. Because she didn't have the talent for cultivation, her father ignored her. Her mother put all her energy on her newly born sister who was tested to have a Xian grade aptitude. Footsteps could be heard approaching the ancestral hall. Gu Shengyin watched, calmly. Now that she was affected by her strength, her divine sense could only see within 3 meters of her. The door of the ancestral hall was opened a little, and a thin and weak figure squeezed in. Her face was delicate and pale. The red mole between her eyebrows made her face brighten up. Jojo. Gu Shengyin immediately recognized her. It was mentioned more than once in the original story. Jojo was most proud of the red beauty mole between her eyebrows. Seeing this, Gu Shengyin couldn't help but touch her face. Between Shi Ling Shi's eyebrows, there was a cinnabar mole in the same position. Chapter 1001. She watched as Jojo quietly walked in. Then, she looked at the table with longing in her eyes. The table in the ancestral hall was filled with food. Every day, a servant would place the freshest food on the table. Today, there were 2 plates of juicy peaches and a plate of whole chicken. In the middle of the table, there was a pot of spirit wine. Jojo looked at the food on the table and swallowed her saliva. She hadn't eaten this kind of food in a long time. As an unfavored daughter, she was always given the worst food in her small courtyard. Those favored young masters and young misses, even the servants who served them, had better days than her. Although she didn't like Jojo, Gu Shengyin also disapproved of the Qiao family's actions when she saw this scene. The Qiao family was also one of the aristocratic families in Eastern Cloud City. Since they had the ability to waste these good things on the dead every day, why not steal them from the gaps between their fingers and give them to the descendants of those families who were not favored? It was no wonder that Qiao Qiao did not help her family in the slightest after she became successful. Even those clansmen who had bullied and humiliated her in the past were all taken revenge by her extremely cruel methods. Jojo looked longingly at the plate of whole chicken. She didn't dare to eat it. Every day, someone would come to inspect it. Once the roasted chicken was touched, it would be noticed at a glance. She walked in front of the peaches and took one. Then, she cleverly arranged the rest of the peaches in a different way. It still looked like a whole plate. Gu Shengyin watched her wolfing down the food. She secretly praised her for being so smart at such a young age. In the original plot, Jojo appeared here too many times and finally attracted Shi Lingxia's attention. In the end, she decided to appear and form a contract with her. Jojo's fate changed because of Shi Lingxi. But this time, Gu Shengyin didn't plan to give her this good opportunity. She had no interest in raising another ingrate. When Jojo finished eating, Gu Shengyin thought that she would leave. Who knew that she actually knelt down in front of the numerous memorial tablets in the ancestral hall? Only the heavens knew that although this place was built to be very spacious and bright, it was filled with memorial tablets that ordinary people would feel horrified just by looking at it. Jojo was just a 12-year-old girl, but she didn't feel scared at all. As expected, he had been abnormal since he was young. "Ancestors, Chow Chow, thank you for the food," Jojo said in a low voice. She began to thank him, and then she began to talk about her troubles. When Gu Shengyin was about to fall asleep listening to her miserable experience, Jojo dropped a bomb. "Those who look down on me and bully me, I, Jojo, swear that one day, I will make them wish they were dead." Gu Shengyin looked at Jojo's young face, revealing a vicious expression that didn't match her age. She suddenly fell silent. See, this was a girl who had been crooked since she was young. Shi Lingxi probably didn't see this scene in the original plot. Otherwise, she wouldn't have formed a contract with Jojo so easily. With this thought, she felt the current strength of her soul and decided to rely on this little girl to get out. When Jojo didn't notice, a small hole suddenly appeared on the hard ground under her. A dark and inconspicuous ring was revealed, and then quietly slipped into her sleeve. Gu Shengyin only felt waves of weakness coming over her. That simple action just now was already too much for her to bear. Chapter 1002. Jojo didn't stay for too long. After a while, the people in charge of guarding the ancestral hall would come in. Gu Shengyin was led out by her. She now planned to go out first, then walk around the streets to find someone pleasing to the eye, who had the best constitution, and cultivate him. As for the worry of raising another ungrateful person, Gu Shengyin said that she was not a saint. Before the contract was signed, both parties must make a soul oath first. She wanted to leave a backup plan. In this day and age, nothing was more reliable than one's own interests. Jojo walked in the huge Chow family's mansion. Not to mention the masters of the Chow family, even the servants didn't greet her. Jojo didn't care. She had long been used to this kind of life. It was good to ignore them, but she was afraid that they would vent their anger on her when they were in a bad mood. Gu Shengyin's luck was still not bad. In the blink of an eye, she saw Jojo go out in the afternoon. She hid in Jojo's sleeve, looking at the people around her. Shi Lingxia's memories were still entrenched in her mind. She was still very familiar with the situation of cultivators. Cultivators' aptitudes were divided into 4 ranks: Heaven, Earth, Xian, and Huang. Of course, there were also those with inferior aptitudes, such as Jojo, who walked like a cripple. She originally thought that she should at least find a child with Earth-grade aptitude to teach. After all, Shi Lingxi had higher standards. According to her, only those with Heaven-grade aptitude could be considered barely acceptable. Unfortunately, she overestimated the situation in the cultivation world today. Not to mention Earth-grade aptitude, she followed Jojo outside for almost 2 hours and didn't even see a Xian-grade aptitude. The rare ones were all Huang-grade aptitude. Most of them were like Jojo, whose aptitude didn't even enter Huang-grade. She didn't have much time. Could it be that she also had to find a person with poor aptitude like in the original plot? Although she had a way to improve a person's aptitude, it would take too much time and energy to do so. Moreover, the foundation was still there. In the original plot, Shi Lingxi used a secret technique to raise Jojo's bone structure to Heaven grade. However, this kind of raised bone structure was definitely a far cry from a true heaven-grade bone structure. It was only in this era, where a heaven rank was rarely seen, that JoJo, a fake heaven rank, had the opportunity to shine. JoJo is out to sell things. She can exchange the little things she got from the Chow family's old house for some low-quality spirit stones, which are useful for her cultivation. Gu Xingyi's gaze was suddenly attracted by a small figure. It was a small boy. He was very young, about 8 or 9 years old. His face was covered in dust and his clothes were badly worn. Such a child was obviously a stray child in this city. What made Gu Shengyin excited was none other than the fact that she felt an extraordinary bone structure in this boy. Without contact, she couldn't be sure of the specific situation. But who was Shi Ling Shi? She was once a strong cultivator in the tribulation stage, someone who was infinitely close to the great Tao. In terms of eyesight, no one in this world could compare with her. This little boy was at least Earth grade. It's him. Gu Shengyin was delighted. JoJo happened to pass by the little boy when she was walking forward. The black ring fell into the little boy's ragged pocket without anyone noticing. Gu Shengyin clearly saw the look of disdain on JoJo's face when she passed by the little boy. Humans were really strange. Even in the Chow family, she was also the object of disdain. But outside, she couldn't help but show the most annoying look to others. The night was over. Good night, everyone. Q3. Chapter 1003. Gu Shengyin followed the little boy all the way forward. She watched the surrounding environment become more and more remote, from the lively market to the quieter civilian residential area, through the dark alley, and finally came to a desolate ruined temple. It was really desolate here. Even the wanderers with some strength would not choose to stay in such a place. Only people like this little boy, who belonged to the lowest level of the wanderers, would stay in such a place. Gu Shengyin felt a little distressed when she looked at him. Earth-grade aptitude. Even in ancient times, such aptitude was enough to enter the top big sect and become an inner disciple. And in this backward era of cultivation, with such aptitude, he could definitely enter the best group of people. He could have been the moon surrounded by the stars, but he was buried in this small ruined temple. But fortunately, he met me. Gu Shengyin thought that with an earth-grade aptitude, she would teach him well, and his future achievements would certainly be good. In the future, she would help her find the materials to reconstruct her body and restore her peak strength. Then, she would not have to worry about not completing the task. It was a little cold at night, and this small ruined temple could not block the howling wind outside at all. Gu Shengyin looked at the little boy's small body curled up in the corner, and took out a fire starter from his arms with trembling hands. There were some branches in front of him, and it seemed that he wanted to make a fire. But the wind was too strong. He tried several times, but every time the flame just jumped up, it was extinguished by the merciless wind. Gu Shengyin looked at his black and bright eyes that were filled with tears due to the thick smoke, but he still persevered in making a fire. She sighed in her heart. She had always liked children, and seeing this situation, her heart was a little tight. As soon as he activated his spiritual energy, the bonfire that couldn't be lit no matter how hard he tried was suddenly lit. A trace of surprise flashed in the little boy's eyes. Once again, he took out something from his arms. It was black and very small. Gu Shengyin took a closer look and found that it was a sweet potato. Looking at the size of the potato that was not full, it should have been thrown away by those small stalls, but it was treasured by this child. The little boy carefully dug out a small hole in the fire and stuffed the sweet potato into it. He had not eaten for a day, and this was the only food he had. For some reason, Gu Shengyin fell silent. "System, can you find his information?" Gu Shengyin asked. The system's white light flashed and gave a negative answer. The original plot did not mention this character, so it is impossible to verify. If an Earth-grade talent was discovered by the cultivation sects of this era, it would definitely be nurtured with great effort. How could it be unknown? The biggest possibility was that in the original plot, this boy's aptitude was never discovered, and he lived a miserable life. The little boy stared at the bonfire intently. This place could bring him warmth, and there would be delicious food later. Suddenly, an old voice rang in his ears. "What's your name?" "Ah." He raised his head in panic and looked around. There was no one around. Then, where did the voice just now come from? He could not help but move closer to the bonfire, thinking of the vivid stories of ghosts he heard outside the tea house during the day. It can't be haunted, right? Gu Shengyin looked at his frightened appearance with amusement. The bonfire in his body was a little too close. If he moved a little closer, his clothes would burn up. Chapter 1004. I'm not a ghost, I'm a cultivator. She said again. Cultivator? The little boy knew that there were many cultivators in this city. Those adults were all high and mighty figures. Those people were respectfully called immortal masters. What did immortal masters come here for? Are you willing to be my disciple? Gu Shengyin asked directly. Disciple? A cultivator wanted to take him as a disciple? The little boy was surprised for a second, but he immediately reacted. I'm just a beggar. There are many powerful young masters and young ladies in this city. How can those good-for-nothings compare to you? Gu Shengyin's tone was indifferent, as if she was saying something that was natural. Compared to your aptitude, those people are just ants. The little boy was a little confused. In his memory, the most people showed to him was disgust and contempt, and the most words they said to him were little beggar and ugly. No one had ever said that he was better than others. Then, in the future, can I be as powerful as those immortal masters? He tried to look around, hoping to see that mysterious immortal master. Gu Shengyin was amused by his ambition. If you're talking about the cultivators in this city, the most powerful one is at the late stage of foundation establishment. How can my disciple be at this level? In the future, you can turn them into ashes with just a flick of your finger. The little boy was still a little vigilant. He was only 8 years old, but he had already encountered a lot of things. He didn't believe that someone would come to him for free. Gu Shengyin looked at his expression and secretly nodded in her heart. He was vigilant, not bad. Although he didn't want to raise an ingrate like Jojo, he also didn't want to raise an ignorant fool. I can make a vow with you. I'll take you as my disciple, and I'll do my best to pass on your cultivation method. After you succeed, you'll find me the materials to reconstruct my physical body. Neither side can betray the other. If there's a breach of the vow, the heavens will punish you and you won't be able to reincarnate. No matter how much words were spoken, it could never be compared to a vow that was bound by the Tao of heaven. The little boy was smart. He knew that this was most likely a chance to change his life. Even if the other party was lying to him, in his current state, what was there to be deceived by others? Immediately, he knelt down and bowed 3 times to the void. Disciple greets master. This was what he had heard from the storyteller. Gu Shengyin looked at him. If it had been 10,000 years ago, if the Jinghong fairy had said that she wanted to take in a disciple, who knew how many geniuses would have rushed forward to burn incense, bathe, worship the heaven and earth, and drink 3 cups of tea and 6 rites. She didn't expect her first disciple to be accepted so carelessly. Oh well, times are different now. Gu Shengyin accepted his salute. Somehow, she felt that there seemed to be karma that had fallen on her. This meant that the heavenly Tao had acknowledged their relationship. What's your name? She asked for the second time. The little boy hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. I don't have a name. Everyone calls me Little Beggar. How could a little beggar who couldn't even guarantee food and clothing have the mind to give himself a name? Gu Shengyin thought for a moment. Since you've taken me as your master, I'll give you a name. According to the seniority of my disciples, you should be from the Yen generation. You'll be called Yen Sui. Are you willing to take my surname? The little boy's eyes lit up. I'm willing. Good, then you'll be called Gu Yen Sui. Chapter 1005. That night, Gu Shengyin and Gu Yensui talked a lot. Gu Yensui knew that his master was a very powerful immortal master who had lost his physical body in an accident and was trapped in the purple firmament ring. Gu Shengyin, on the other hand, had gained a deeper understanding of her little disciple. He did not know who his parents were, and from the earliest memories, he had lived with an old beggar. That old beggar had not been very good to him, and he had probably kept him as a pet to relieve his loneliness. Even so, the old beggar had been his only family member. His only family member had passed away last winter. Gu Shengyin thought that compared to her own disciple, the treatment that Jojo had suffered in the Qiao family was nothing. After all, the Qiao family still had to keep up appearances, and they would not shortchange their family members. Looking at Gu Yensui's dirty and black clothes, Gu Shengyin sighed. "Put your hand into your pocket." Gu Yensui did as he was told and touched something hard. It was a black ring. Gu Yensui asked curiously, "This is the purple firmament ring that Master mentioned?" With such a powerful name, he had thought that it would be something good. It did not look like much at all. A young child's thoughts were written all over his face. Gu Shengyin said, "Bite your middle finger and drip a drop of blood on it." She was now considered a ring spirit, and dripping a drop of blood on the ring was just a ritual. The key was to gain her recognition as a ring spirit. Gu Yensui did as he was told. The dark red blood dripped onto the black ring, and the originally unremarkable ring instantly changed. It was as if something had wiped away the outer layer of darkness and revealed the inner layer of light. The true appearance of the purple heaven ring was also revealed. It was a spiritual weapon refined from an extremely rare 1,000-year-old purple jade. Complex runes were engraved on it, and it looked very delicate. The whole ring shone in the darkness. Gu Yensui stared at the ring in his hand that had changed greatly and then looked at his dirty hands. He suddenly felt that he was not worthy to hold it. Gu Shengyin felt a new power being transmitted into his soul, and the feeling of weakness that he had felt earlier instantly disappeared. This was the benefit of forming a contract. She moved her consciousness, and a large pile of things appeared on the ground of the run-down temple. "That little bottle on the left. Pick it up. There are white elixirs in it. Take one and it will make you go hungry for 10 days. Fortunately, these things were sealed in the purple firmament ring. If they were outside, they would have all been destroyed in 10,000 years. Gu Yensui reached out and was about to take it when he suddenly paused. He put the ring on the ground and ran to the back of the run-down temple. Gu Shengyin's consciousness could now extend up to 5 meters, and she could see clearly that he was washing his hands. When he came out again, Gu Yensui's hands had been washed clean, and he washed his face as well. Gu Shengyin looked at the child with red lips and white teeth in amazement. It was hard to imagine that this was the little beggar from earlier. Gu Yensui smiled embarrassedly and said, "My face was painted like that on purpose. Old Chong told me that if I don't want to be sold by bad people, I have to do that." Old Chong was the old beggar who had raised Gu Yensui. Gu Shengyin looked at his exquisite face and understood what the old beggar had said. In this world, men and women who were beautiful but did not have the ability to protect themselves all ended up in a miserable state. Chapter 1006. It's a pity I don't have any clothes you can wear. Tomorrow, take this spirit stone to the pawn shop and exchange it for some money you can use here. Jinghong Fairy's purple heaven ring naturally wouldn't have anything bad. After rummaging for a long time, she finally found a few mid-grade spirit stones among the countless high-grade spirit stones. Mid-grade spirit stones were extremely hard to come by in Eastern Cloud City. The next day, Jin Yuzhai, the largest pawn shop in Eastern Cloud City, had a guest who didn't fit in. As the largest pawn shop in Eastern Cloud City, Jin Yuzhai's customers were all rich and respectable. But today, a little beggar in ragged clothes came. But speaking of which, although this little beggar's clothes weren't very good and were old and tattered, his body was very clean and his appearance was extremely rare. To be able to work here as a clerk, the clerk wasn't stupid. He didn't look down on Gu Yensui just because of his appearance. "This little young master, why have you come here?" he asked carefully. It was Gu Yensui's first time entering a place like this, so he was actually a bit scared. But he firmly remembered his master's words to him, "You are my disciple. In terms of status, no one in this world is more noble than you. You don't need to fear anyone." He raised his head and said crisply, "I'm here to pawn something." He was very handsome. When he raised his head like this, he really did look a bit like a young master from an aristocratic family. Even the trace of nervousness in his eyes was interpreted by the clerk as him being afraid to go out alone. After all, he was still so young. "What does little young master want to pawn?" the clerk asked with a smile. Gu Yensui glanced at him. According to what Gu Shangyin taught him, you can't make the decision, find someone who can. The clerk was shocked when he heard this. He was even more certain that this little young master wasn't an ordinary person. But his appearance... Gu Yensui's little face stiffened. "What? Is this how Jin Yuzhai treats its customers?" The waiter's expression changed. He smiled and said, "Young master, please don't be angry. Please take a seat and rest for a while. I will call the steward." He left in a hurry. Soon, a smart-looking middle-aged man with a mustache followed him in. The middle-aged man had obviously heard about what had happened from the waiter. The moment he saw Gu Yensui, he began to greet him. "I heard that young master wants to pawn something in our humble abode?" He secretly sized up Gu Yensui. But looking at his appearance, he really didn't look like he was raised by an ordinary family. Putting aside his dressing, his hands didn't look like they belonged to a pampered young master of an aristocratic family. Could it be a lie? At this moment, the steward suddenly felt an immense pressure crushing down on him. Cold sweat instantly dripped down his back. At the same time, an old female voice sounded coldly in his mind. "Is the young master of our family someone you can casually size up?" The steward hurriedly shifted his gaze away and raised his hands to apologize. "Senior, please forgive me." This junior just couldn't help but take a few more glances at the young master's unique physique. It was only then that the pressure moved away. The steward was drenched in cold sweat. He was a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator. In Dongyun City, he could be considered a high-level expert. But the voice just now was able to suppress him with just pressure. It was obvious that this person was at least a great realm higher than him. A middle-stage golden core cultivator as a guard. What exactly was the background of this little young master? Gao Lengji said, "His background is very big. He's the disciple of a tribulation-passing stage ancestor. If I tell you, you'll be scared to death. If you don't give me the ticket, I'll release the female lead and scare Ni Meng to death." Chapter 1007. A smile quickly appeared on the manager's face, and he said to Gu Yensui in a gentle tone, "I wonder what young master wants to sell in my Jin Yuzhai?" A brocade pouch appeared in Gu Yensui's hand, and he casually tossed it to the manager. The manager's eyes narrowed. With his eyesight, he could naturally see that the brocade pouch had appeared in the young master's hand out of thin air. In other words, this young master had at least one storage spirit tool in his hand. A storage spiritual artifact was definitely something that could only be found by chance. The steward's opinion of Gu Yensui rose to another level in his heart. Gu Yensui said with a serious face, "Open it and see." The manager hurriedly opened the pouch in his hand. Gu Shengyin looked at Gu Yensui's appearance and wanted to laugh. He had delicate features, and with such a serious face, he didn't give people the slightest impression of dignity. Instead, he looked very cute. She had picked up a cute treasure. Gu Shengyin thought to herself. The manager opened the pouch in his hand, and his entire body froze for a moment. Inside this brocade pouch, there was actually a dense array of glowing mid-grade spirit stones. Sensing the spiritual power overflowing from them, he found that these were mid-grade spirit stones of the highest quality, only a little bit away from second-rate high-grade spirit stones. Mid-grade spirit stones, In Eastern Cloud City, the currency used between cultivators was basically spirit beads. Only the young masters and young ladies of those large aristocratic families would use spirit stones. Of course, the most they could possess were low-grade spirit stones. He had never heard of anyone in Eastern Cloud City who could casually toss out so many high-quality mid-grade spirit stones. This young master couldn't have come from some other large city, right? As if confirming his guess, the young master in front of him seemed to grumble with some dissatisfaction. After coming to this place, I don't even have a place to spend my money. Apart from those large sects, who would use mid-grade spirit stones as currency. The manager took a deep breath and said with a smile, "There are 49 mid-grade spirit stones here. Does young master want to pawn them all? What do you want in exchange?" Gu Yensui rolled his eyes and said, "First, find 2 sets of clothes that I can wear. Remember, don't bring me the ones that are too bad. As for the rest, I'll take a look myself." The steward nodded his head repeatedly. In his heart, he was also bewildered. With the protection of such an expert, he did not know how this young master had fallen to such a state. He thought for a while, but still couldn't figure it out. He shook his head and ordered the assistant beside him to bring a few sets of clothes over. How could Gu Yensui recognize these things? To him, everything that he had experienced today was like a dream. He entered Jin Yuzhai, a place he never dared to dream of. The shop assistants and stewards, who were usually arrogant, welcomed him with smiles. All of this was given to me by master. He silently thought as he grew more and more curious about the master he had never met. The steward followed beside him. Seeing that this young master's expression did not even change as he looked at the top-grade spirit tools, he was even more certain that the other must have seen many good things on a daily basis. That was why he was so calm. However, he was thinking too much. Gu Yensui was so calm only because he did not know what these things were or how much they were worth. Gu Shengyin, on the other hand, completely despised these things. Chapter 1008. What the hell are these things? Her brows furrowed deeply. How could these crudely made things have the nerve to call them spiritual tools? Gu Shengyin looked at them for a while and couldn't stand it anymore. She said to Gu Yensui, "Let's go look at the spiritual herbs." Hearing Gu Yensui's request, the steward was shocked. Could it be that this young master didn't like any of them? He didn't show it on his face and only led Gu Yensui to look at the spiritual herbs. Shi Lingxi was a strong cultivator in the crossing calamity stage. Even if she wasn't an alchemist, her level of refining medicine was much higher than that of ordinary mid-level alchemists. Now, she had to lay a good foundation for Gu Yensui's body. Gu Yensui had never cultivated before, so she could only start from the lowest level of cultivation medicine. As for medicinal herbs, there were no low-level things in the Jinghong Fairy's purple heaven ring. Fortunately, there were all kinds of low-level medicinal herbs here. The steward followed them and watched this young master walk while pointing at the spiritual herbs one by one for him to pack. The more he looked, the more shocked he was. It seemed that he was going to refine medicine, but among these medicinal herbs, there were low-level and high-level ones. He had never heard that refining that kind of medicine required these kinds of spiritual herbs. "Give me 20 sets of all of these." Gu Yensui pointed at the things he had just chosen. "Just deduct it from the spirit stones I just took out." While they were talking, the shop assistant had already brought the clothes over. At this moment, the steward also felt that this young master's ragged clothes were really unsightly, so he suggested that he change clothes first. The shop assistant held the clothes and brought Gu Yensui to the cloakroom. But after the shop assistant left, Gu Yensui stood there for a long time without moving. Gu Shengyin was about to ask when she heard the child's shy words. "Moss Master later, can you not look?" Gu Shengyin couldn't help but laugh. Was she shy? She probed with her divine sense. Sure enough, the child's fair face was flushed red, and his hands were tightly clasped together. She laughed. Okay. I won't look. You're a boy. Why are you so shy?" Gu Yensui pursed his lips and began to change his clothes after receiving his master's reply. However, after a while, Gu Shengyin heard her little disciple calling out to her again. "Master." Gu Shengyin didn't look at him and only asked, "What's wrong?" Gu Yensui sounded like he was about to cry. I won't. Gu Shengyin. She could only look over. As it turned out, the clothes that the shop assistant had prepared were all standard for aristocratic family members. Gu Yensui couldn't make all those complicated clothes, underwear, robes, belts, and so on by himself. Although Gu Shengyin knew how to put them on, she didn't have a body now. She could only say it verbally and couldn't help much. Thus, the shop assistant waiting outside received a summons from the young master inside. "Come here. Help me put on my clothes." A muffled voice came from inside. The shop assistant didn't seem to be surprised. He went in and saw Gu Yensui standing there alone with his clothes in his arms. His face seemed to be a little red. He chuckled as he helped Gu Yensui put on his clothes one by one. He sighed in his heart. He is indeed the son of an aristocratic family. This young master must have been served since he was young. He doesn't even know how to wear clothes. What a beautiful misunderstanding. Chapter 1009. Gu Yensui tried his best to follow what Gu Shengyin taught him. He kept a straight face and put on a proud expression. His bag of middle-grade spirit stones was not only used to exchange for a lot of elixirs and 2 sets of clothes, but also a lot of low-grade spirit stones and spirit beads for his daily expenses. When it was time to leave, the steward personally sent him out of the door very attentively. When Gu Yensui came out of the golden fish algae again, no one could associate him with the ragged little beggar from before. When others saw him, they would only feel strange. Which family would let such a young master come out by himself? When they walked to the side of the road, Gu Shengyin asked him, "Are you hungry?" Gu Yensui shook his head. He ate a pill given to him by his master, so he didn't feel hungry at all. Gu Shengyin was someone who had raised a child. She thought of Alan Eyre, the child that she had raised single-handedly. The two of them were both raised by her, but their circumstances were completely different. Alan Eyre was born with the blessings of all the elves and was liked by everyone. When he was with her, he would act spoiled and directly say what he wanted. He was completely a child who grew up in a jar of honey. But Gu Yensui was different. The first 8 years of his life had left a deep mark on his life. In the past, when he wanted something, he didn't have the ability to have it. Now that he could have it, he was used to suppressing his desires. For example, just now, Gu Shengyin saw very clearly that he swallowed his saliva when he looked at the vendor selling sugar figurines on the side of the road. Perhaps, for a long time in his life, eating cheap and inferior sugar figurines was an extravagant hope. Yensui. Gu Shengyin didn't even realize how gentle her voice was. "Master." Gu Yensui obediently shouted. "Do you want to eat sugar figurines?" she asked. Gu Yensui hesitated for a moment. Gu Shengyin encouraged him, "If you want to eat, say it out loud and go buy it." Gu Yensui looked up at the vendor again and nodded. "Yes." Gu Shengyin felt a little sour in her heart. She said, "If you want to eat, then take the money and buy one. Remember, Yensui, you are now my disciple. No matter what you want to do, as long as it's not something outrageous, you can do it. Master is here." Gu Yensui's eyes were a little red. He didn't say anything and just ran to the vendor to buy a candy figurine. He still remembered that he had passed by this place countless times and saw other children happily buying food under the guidance of adults. At that time, the old beggar was still alive. It was rare for him to tell him that he wanted to eat the candy man. But how did the old beggar answer, "I don't even have food to eat, and you still want to eat candy? If you have the money, you might as well buy a steamed bun." Since then, he had never said what he wanted. Because he knew that he couldn't afford it. But now, he had his master. Although his master couldn't hold his hand like other parents, she was always by his side. He put the candy figurine in his mouth. The sweet taste spread from the tip of his tongue to his heart. It didn't taste very good, and it was even a little too sweet. But Gu Yensui felt that he had never eaten something so delicious in his life. "Master," he called out softly. Gu Shengyin didn't hear him clearly. Gu Yensui didn't say anything else and just licked the candy figurine in his hand. "Thank you, master." Chapter 10:10. Damn little bastard, how dare you steal my things? I'll beat you to death. A middle-aged man was beating a little beggar in front of him. The little beggar was like a weak little chick under the middle-aged man's hands. He had no room to resist at all. There were many people watching the scene, but no one spoke up to help the little beggar. Many people were even jeering. "Teacher." Gu Yensui looked there seriously and suddenly opened his mouth. "What's wrong?" Gu Yensui was obviously a little confused. "I know this person. He used to bully me. He stole my food and made me hungry for 2 days." Gu Shengyin didn't understand what he meant and asked, "So? Did he want to take revenge?" Gu Yensui frowned his beautiful eyebrows. "But when I look at him, I feel that he is very pitiful. He stole because he was so hungry that he couldn't take it anymore. That burly man didn't suffer much loss." Gu Shengyin heard this and understood what he meant. She didn't expect that Gu Yensui, who grew up in such an environment, would have a pure heart that was not polluted. Gu Yensui asked her at this time, "Teacher, do you think I should go out and stop that strong man now?" Gu Shengyin gave him the choice. "Yensui, I said that you only need to think about what you want to do. For example, at this moment, if you want to help that child, go. If you don't want to, don't go. It's good that you think about it clearly." Gu Yensui seemed to have never made such a big decision by himself. The little beggar's voice in front of him was getting louder and louder. Gu Yensui finally made up his mind. He almost ran in front of the strong man and shouted, "Stop fighting!" When the strong man heard someone stop him, he was a little unhappy and turned his head with a fierce face. But when he saw Gu Yensui dressed like a rich young master, his momentum couldn't help but weaken. He was just a commoner. He couldn't afford to offend such a young master. However, he wasn't willing to let the thief off just like that. The big man said in a muffled voice, "Little young master, you don't know. This little beggar always steals from my family. It's obviously my first time stealing." The little beggar under him couldn't help but shout, "Little brat, you still dare to quibble." The large man glared and was about to attack again. Gu Yensui couldn't stand it anymore. He took out a few spirit beads from his sleeve and handed them to the big man. "Okay, stop fighting. This is to compensate for your loss." He had an impatient look on his face. The burly man couldn't figure out his identity. Seeing how generous he was, he weighed his options and put down the person in his hand. "Brat, you're lucky today. Since you've met a benefactor, I'll let you off," he said viciously to the little beggar before turning around and leaving. Seeing that the matter was settled, Gu Yensui turned around and left. The little beggar behind him chased after him. "Benefactor." He stopped Gu Yensui and rolled his shrewd eyes. "Benefactor saved my life. I want to repay my benefactor." Gu Yensui frowned. "I don't need you to repay me. I just happened to see it today." The little beggar was a little unwilling to forgive him. He looked at the young master who was dressed in rich clothes and was very kind. He thought that if he could follow him, at least he wouldn't have to worry about food and clothes in the future. "Send it to me at 8 o'clock. I don't have it today. I'll see if I can write more tonight and put some up in the early morning. Today is the 5th. There are 2 days left for the double monthly ticket. If you have a monthly ticket, don't forget to vote for Zhijiang. Also, don't stop voting for the recommendation tickets." Chapter 10:11. Gu Shengyin didn't say anything. She quietly looked at Gu Yensui, wanting to see how he would deal with this kind of thing. Gu Yensui refused several times, but the little beggar seemed to be determined and wanted to rely on him. But Gu Yensui was not a naive young master raised by a rich family. He roughly knew why the little beggar wanted to follow him. It was nothing more than wanting to rely on him for a future without worrying about food and clothing. But he had his master's purple heaven ring in his hand. This kind of secret, he couldn't let anyone get close to him. What's more, the little beggar didn't look like a well-behaved person. Seeing the little beggar blocking his way and not allowing him to leave, Gu Yensue's expression completely turned cold. I can save you from the big man, so naturally I can let you return to that situation. The little beggar was stunned. He thought this young master was kind-hearted. He pretended to be pitiful and begged, and most likely he could succeed. He didn't expect this person to be so cold-hearted. Gu Yensui glanced at him. Don't follow me anymore. Then, she walked over his body and walked past him. The little beggar didn't dare to stop him this time. He watched Gu Yensui leave. He understood that the person who saved him was different from those young masters. Gu Yensui walked forward until he couldn't see the little beggar. Then he breathed a sigh of relief. The forced indifference on his face was also removed. Why didn't you let the little beggar follow you just now? Gu Shengyin asked. Gu Yensui was a little confused. He thought Gu Shengyin was blaming him for being too cruel. Master, do you think I did something wrong? He seemed to be a little helpless. Gu Shengyin sighed. She had already found that although Gu Yensui could pretend to be an arrogant young master, he was still very insecure and even a little inferior. Especially when facing her, his attitude was always so careful that it made her heart ache. She tried her best to soften her voice. Yensui, have you forgotten what Master said? Master said that you should be responsible for your own decisions. Master just wants to ask you, why did you reject that little beggar? When Gu Yensui heard that his master had no intention of blaming him, he felt relieved. His mind was very clear to begin with. Now that he had calmed down and thought about it, he roughly understood that his master had the intention of testing him. He organized his thoughts and said slowly, First, I have the secret of the purple cloud ring and the existence of my master, so it's not suitable for anyone to know. Second, I don't think this person is very honest. He wants to follow me not because he wants to repay my kindness, but because he wants something else. Third. When he said this, he paused. Gu Shengyin was listening. Hearing him suddenly stop, she couldn't help but ask curiously, what's wrong with the third one? Gu Yensui felt that it was best not to let his master know what he was going to say next, but he did not want to lie to his master. Thus, he answered honestly, Disciple actually has selfish motives. I don't want master to take a fancy to other children. This was his selfish motive. Today's days were too good. He was not willing to see his master like other children. He was not willing to see his master take a fancy to other children. A person who had never eaten candy might not have any extravagant hopes. But for a person who had eaten the most fragrant honey in the world, if he were to eat coarse sugar again, it would become a torture. Chapter 10-12. Gu Shengyin did not expect to hear such words from her little disciple. She was silent for a moment. She looked at Gu Yensui's lowered head, as if he was ready to accept her punishment at any time. Finally, she sighed. A child like this, it was really hard to be cruel to him. Yensui, don't worry. Master will not accept any other disciples. You are the most special one. She accepted this disciple under the influence of various factors. Teaching one disciple was enough to exhaust her mental and physical strength. Gu Shengyin expressed that she did not have so much time to raise another child. Gu Yensui's little face showed a happy smile because of her words. All right, don't be happy so quickly. Let's find a place to settle down first. Gu Shengyin interrupted his silly smile. The two of them rented a courtyard in Eastern Cloud City. In addition, Gu Shengyin also let Gu Yensui go to the market to buy 3 slaves. 2 of them were big and strong men, and a healthy middle-aged woman, who would be responsible for his daily life. The 3 of them had bought an irrevocable contract, which meant that after Gu Yensui bought them, all 3 of their lives would belong to him. But Gu Shengyin was not at ease with such a death contract. It was just a contract. If those people had any bad intentions, although she was confident that the other party would not be able to hurt them, it was better to be safe than sorry, right? So, on the first day of bringing the three of them back, Gu Shengyin once again pretended to be the mysterious guard of the young master and gave the three of them a fierce warning. Not only that, she also forced the three of them to swear a master and servant oath. In the future, if any of them had any thoughts of rebellion, the contract would immediately take effect and that person would die without a burial place. The method of a master has always been to give a carrot after a stick. Gu Shengyin was well versed in this. After the three of them made the oath, they received 3 low-level cultivation techniques from her. It was just a simple body-forging technique. Even if one did not have the talent for cultivation, they could still practice it to strengthen their body. However, very few people were able to advance through it. In ancient times, this cultivation method was like a textbook, and everyone could learn it. But now, it was considered a lost antique. In the current cultivation world, any cultivation technique, even if it was a low-level one, was regarded as a treasure, let alone this one. At that time, the three of them acted as if they had received a precious treasure. They knelt down and kowtowed to Gu Yensui, without the slightest resentment of being forced to swear an oath. Gu Shengyin was generous and bought a large courtyard. Gu Yensui lived in the innermost inner courtyard, the cook lived in the east wing, and the 2 strong men lived in the outer courtyard. Gu Yensui had already made it clear that they were not allowed to enter the inner courtyard on normal days. The kitchen maids would prepare food and send it to him every day. As for the 2 guards, they would just watch the door when they had nothing to do. It was very easy. When the 3 of them were bought, they were very nervous. They did not expect the new owner to be so easy to talk to. For a moment, they were grateful to Gu Yensui. They were loyal to him. In the inner courtyard, Gu Shengyin began the process of transforming Gu Yensui's bone structure. In the cultivation world, children before the age of 10 were the best time to build a foundation. Those children from the big sects, who had good conditions, even when they were in their mother's womb, would be infused with Xiantian true qi every day to build up the bone structure of the fetus. After the fetus was born, it would be supplemented with elixirs internally and medicinal baths externally to strengthen the body, firmly building the foundation of the body. Gu Yensui's starting point was much worse than others. But it did not matter. He had a master who was in the tribulation stage, the only one in the cultivation world. Gu Shengyin was sure that in the original plot, Shi Lingxi would not be as attentive to Jojo as she was to Gu Yensui. She was Gu Shengyin's disciple. Of course, she would not be worse than anyone else. Therefore, this was a world of masters. It had been a long time since she last updated at midnight. Although it was only 2 short chapters, Gao Lengji would continue to write diligently and strive to be a diligent person who would update at midnight as soon as possible. Chapter 1013. Gu Shengyin had to admit that some people were born to walk this path. The medicinal decoction that she made for Gu Yensui had the best effect for him at this stage and could maximize his potential. In the original plot, Shi Lingxi also made a medicinal decoction for Jojo, but it was a gentler one. There was only one reason. Although this medicinal decoction was very effective, its medicinal properties were also the strongest. This also meant that when the body was soaked in it, the pain would be the most intense. Gu Shengyin had reminded Gu Yensui more than once that if he could not bear it, he must tell her. However, when Gu Yensui was soaked in the medicinal decoction for the first time, even though his face was pale and bloodless from the pain and he even fainted, he did not tell her that it was no good. Gu Yensui knew in his heart that since his master said that this was the most effective decoction, she must not have lied to him. His master was so good to him, so of course he had to do his best and not let her down. Gu Shengyin saw his persistence. She was somewhat gratified. With such an excellent aptitude and a child who could endure hardship, coupled with her guidance, there was almost no suspense about his future. She had also been paying attention to Jojo's side, and there had been no accidents. Now, the only thing that she was not sure about was her lover. She had once suspected that Gu Yensui would be her lover in this world. According to the general development of the plot, even her own feelings for this child made her feel that it should be Gu Yensui. However, He did not have the lotus fragrance that Gu Shengyin was able to confirm in the end. Perhaps, the lover in this world was someone else? Or could it be that Gu Yensui's body, had something happened to him? Gu Shengyin could not get an accurate answer. She could only shake her head. She was now only left with a little spirit and was still trapped in this purple heaven ring. Her strength had been greatly reduced, and it was not convenient for her to do anything. Perhaps, he would only be able to find him after he reconstructed his physical body? She glanced at Gu Yensui. Regardless of whether this child was him or not, he was still a disciple that she acknowledged in her heart. She would teach him with all her heart until he shone brightly in this world. This time, Gu Yensui soaked in the medicinal soup for half a year. In the beginning, Gu Yensui was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. Now, he could soak in the bathtub for an hour without any change in his expression. In this half a year, Gu Shengyin did not teach him any cultivation techniques or techniques. She had told Gu Yensui directly, "Your body is too weak. The strength of your bones will determine how far you can go in the future. Only when you have a solid foundation will you have a chance to reach that supreme realm in the future." In fact, Gu Yensui didn't really understand these things. He only knew one thing, and that was that his master would never lie to him, nor would he harm him. If Gu Shengyin knew this child's thoughts, she would probably not know whether to laugh or cry. He relied on her too much. Half a year of medicinal bathing had changed Gu Yensui greatly. His skin was originally very white. Under the training of the medicinal bath, the layer of dead skin on his skin had completely shed off, and the new skin was even fairer and softer. His temperament had also undergone a huge change. If it was said that there was a trace of timidity and inferiority that came from his bones before, then now, he had truly become a noble young master that had been nurtured by the warmth of gold and jade. Gu Yensui spread out his hands and looked at his palms. There were originally some calluses that had been brought about by his poor life, but now, they were completely clean. Anyone who saw them would think that these were a pair of hands that had lived like a prince. Only he himself knew what kind of strength was contained in these seemingly weak and powerless hands. Chapter 10:14. Gu Yan was certain that the two burly men in the courtyard who were specially bought as guards were no longer a match for him. "Yen Sui." The old female voice called out to him. Gu Yensui's expression suddenly became respectful. "Master, now that your body's foundation has been laid, the medicinal bath is no longer necessary." Gu Yensui's heart relaxed, and then he became happy. "Does this mean that I can really start cultivating?" Gu Shengyin saw his sparkling eyes and smiled helplessly in her heart. In the end, he's still a child, and his thoughts still show on his face. In the past 6 months, Gu Yensui didn't just simply soak in the medicinal bath to warm his body. Every day, Gu Shengyin would take out an hour to explain to him some common knowledge of this world and things in the cultivation world. For example, the several most powerful forces in this world, the hierarchy of cultivators, some famous young geniuses, and so on. Of course, there were also more routine things, such as teaching him how to read, and letting the cook teach him simple cooking. After all, Gu Yensui couldn't live here all the time, and those people couldn't always be by his side. Fortunately, Gu Yensui was talented and intelligent, and he learned everything very quickly. Gu Shengyin felt very relieved. There was nothing happier than having a talented disciple. "There's no class today, go play in the city. Starting tomorrow, we'll move to another place to live," Gu Shengyin said to Gu Yensui. Gu Yensui nodded obediently. Gu Shengyin felt that this child should be very happy. After all, listening to the old voice talking to him for 2 hours every day, any child would feel very bored, right? But she didn't know that the 2 hours of listening to his master explain the lessons to him every day was actually what Gu Yensui looked forward to the most. No one had ever taught him so gently and patiently. Even if he said something wrong, she wouldn't scold him. Instead, she would teach him more carefully. Gu Yensui had imagined his master's appearance countless times in his mind. She was probably a kind-looking old lady with gentle eyes. Gu Shengyin. It was not Gu Yensui's fault. In order to appear more dignified, Gu Shengyin finally used the voice-changing skill that she had obtained from this world when she spoke, making her voice sound very old. That would make him seem more reliable, she thought. How could he have known that his little disciple would imagine such a scene? Gu Yensui had actually asked about his master before. At that time, Gu Shengyin just smiled faintly and replied, "Master has made a contract with you. The stronger you are, the better Master's soul will recover. When you are strong enough, Master will be able to break free from the purple heaven ring shackles and come out. Then I must become strong as soon as possible, so that Master can come out quickly." Chapter 10-15. Jojo. In this half a month, she was busy making plans for Gu Yensui for the next 1.5 years, so she paid less attention to Jojo. She didn't expect that she would change so much in this half a month. She saw Jojo, who was wearing a gorgeous dress, walking with a few people who looked like young masters and young ladies, with a group of people following behind her. It seemed that she was living a good life now. The people with her should be the young masters and young ladies who were favored by Qiao family. However, Gu Shengyin saw that although Jojo was smiling, there was no smile in her eyes. It was obvious that she didn't take these people and their compliments to heart. However, this was not the palace that Gu Shengyin was concerned about. She sensed devil energy on Jojo's body. Although it was very weak and almost undetectable, what kind of person was Gu Shengyin? Although her physical body was damaged, her divine sense and vision were still at the level of a strong cultivator in the tribulation stage. In terms of vision, no one could be better than her. Qiao Qiao practiced the cultivation method of the devil path. Her strength should have something to do with it. Gu Shengyin thought of the original plot, when Jojo used soul devouring on Shi Ling Shi at the end. That was a long time in the future. Could it be that her change of target for taking in a disciple also caused Jojo's fate to change? Gu Shengyin was about to ask the system to check on her, when all the system's messages were transmitted to her mind. At the same time, the system sent back a message, "I'm really sorry, host, I went into hibernation these few days, so I didn't remember to inform you." Gu Shengyin didn't have time to worry about the system's hibernation. She was looking at Jojo's information. It turned out that half a month ago, Jojo had picked up a shabby jade slip in her shabby courtyard. It was precisely because the jade slip was severely damaged that the defensive array formation on it had also lost its function, allowing Jojo to take advantage of it. Inside was the inheritance left behind by a demonic cultivator at the spirit severing stage. Back then, he was besieged by the righteous cultivators and was seriously injured. He was no longer able to create a secret realm. He could only leave his cultivation experience and treasures in a jade slip in the hope of finding a fated person. He didn't know how that jade slip ended up in Jojo's small courtyard. The cultivation method of the demonic path had always been different from that of the righteous path. The demonic path did not insist on one's foundation. There were even some who entered the path through killing and evil. There were all kinds of strange things. This demonic cultivator at the soul formation stage cultivated the Tao of devouring. He forcefully seized other people's things to strengthen himself. It could be lifespan, life force, spirit root, or even destiny. In the end, it was what Jojo used on Shi Ling Shi in the original plot, soul devouring. Looking at Jojo's current appearance, it was obvious that she had already reached the 7th level of Qi refining stage. In other words, she had already begun to cultivate that set of cultivation method and had already begun to plunder. Gu Shengyin only felt a burst of disgust. Forcefully taking other people's things for her own use. Under her own path of success, there were piles of other people's bones. This kind of cultivation method was really deranged. When she dreamed in the middle of the night, wouldn't she be awakened by nightmares? Jojo was absent-mindedly listening to the words of her cousin beside her. These people, when she was weak, each and every one of them looked at her like she was an ant. It was as if looking at her would dirty their eyes. But now, her strength was stronger than theirs, but each and every one of them was chasing after her. This kind of attitude was really disgusting. Chapter 1016. Her gaze looked around and suddenly stopped at a certain spot as her eyes lit up. That was a young master. Looking at his appearance, he should be a descendant of an aristocratic family. Behind him, there were two big men who looked very intimidating. But from Jojo's point of view, they were just two ordinary people, nothing much. Jojo's gaze at him could be considered as infatuated. Ever since she started learning that magic cultivation method, she learned a skill, and that was aura observation. Simply put, it was to see a person's innate talent or other aspects that were better than ordinary people. For example, if a person's innate talent was very good, in Jojo's eyes, she could clearly see that this person's body would emit a ball of light that was much brighter than ordinary people. Every time she found the right person, she would find those who had a little more innate talent than ordinary people. Only in this way, she would be able to gain benefits from it. At this moment, this young master, in Jojo's eyes, was simply like a small moving sun. Jojo had never seen such a bright light on anyone, including her father, the patriarch of the Chow family. She felt that her breathing had become hurried. Such a bright white light, what did it mean? It meant that this young master had an extremely terrifying innate talent. Those so-called talented descendants of her family, compared to this person in front of her, were simply the light of fireflies. If she could get his innate talent. Jojo's gaze suddenly became fiery. Gu Yensui only felt a very intense gaze falling on his body. He frowned as he saw the source of the gaze. It was a delicate and cute-looking girl. The red mole in between her eyebrows was very conspicuous. She was looking at him without blinking. Gu Yensui knew that his appearance was good. Usually when he went out, he would also receive many startled gazes. But it was different from now. Gu Yensui had an illusion that the girl opposite him was looking at him with a passionate gaze, as if she wanted to eat him up immediately. It made people feel very uncomfortable. Seeing that Gu Yensui had discovered her, Jojo did not avoid him. Instead, she slowly smiled at Gu Yensui. Gu Yensui frowned and turned his head away. He knew it was impolite, but the other party made him feel strange. Gu Yensui might not know what was wrong, but how could Gu Shengyin not know? At this moment, her heart was burning with rage. Jojo, how dare she have designs on Gu Yensui? This was the first time such a terrifying killing intent had appeared in her heart. Even if the other party's target was herself, she would not have lost her composure. The little disciple that he had raised with his own hands was actually being coveted by others who wanted to steal his talent and take his life. How could Gu Shengyin tolerate this? She had originally planned to let it go if Jojo knew her place. She would not argue with an ordinary person who could not cultivate and would not have any interaction with her. But now, no matter what, she could not let her go. Yensui, let's go home after reading, she said lightly. Gu Yensui only felt that his master's voice was a little strange recently. It was colder and murderous than usual. But he just obediently replied, "Okay, master." No matter what, his master was that master. 2 more updates. See you tonight, Jojo. Where are the monthly votes? If you don't give me the monthly votes, I'll eat you. Chapter 1017. On the way back, Gu Shengyin still felt uneasy. She couldn't help but say, "That girl just now had a red mole between her eyebrows. She kept looking at you. Did you see it?" Gu Yensui nodded. Gu Shengyin warned him, "When you see her in the future, stay away from her." When she mentioned Chow Chow, her tone was cold without her noticing. Gu Yensui was a little curious. This was the first time in half a year that his master expressed displeasure to someone. He asked, "Master, why?" If it was the previous Gu Yensui, he would never ask this question. Even if he didn't know, he was used to not troubling others. So, Gu Shengyin's teaching in the past half a year was still useful. Gu Shengyin replied, "This person cultivates the devil path." Devil path? Gu Yensui was shocked. These days, under Gu Shengyin's teaching, he was no longer the little beggar who knew nothing about the cultivation world. Of course, he knew that the devil path was an extremely unpopular type of cultivator in the cultivation world. They didn't pay attention to human relations and justice. They only cared about the so-called carefree and casual nature. They even often committed murder. It was said that a few hundred years ago, many high-level cultivators in the cultivation world joined hands and began a great purge of the devil path cultivators. At that time, it was said that blood flowed like a river. Less than 1 in 10 devil path cultivators survived. Since then, their vitality was greatly damaged. They were no longer as arrogant as before. One by one, they hid in the dark to recuperate. At least until now, there were no devil path cultivators who dared to appear in the cultivation world without concealing themselves. The world's most powerful sects jointly issued an edict to kill any devil path cultivator they encountered. As for demonic Tao cultivators, in the countless legends that were left behind, they had become the epitome of evil. Gu Yensui collected his thoughts and hurriedly said, "Please rest assured, Master. This disciple will definitely stay away from that person." Gu Xingyin's heart actually didn't have any special views on the so-called righteous path or demonic path. In her opinion, whether a person cultivated a righteous path or a demonic path cultivation method was not important. What was important was what he had done. Take the devil path for example. There are also those who practice the Tao of freedom. They pay particular attention to following one's heart and enjoying themselves while they can. Although it is not in line with the philosophy propagated by the righteous cultivators, they have never done anything evil. Gu Shangyin felt that her words might cause Gu Yensui to misunderstand. She didn't want her disciple to be someone who couldn't distinguish right from wrong. She said, "Yensui, Master told you to stay away from her not because she's cultivating a demonic art, but because she's cultivating a demonic art that absorbs people's strength to strengthen herself." Gu Yensui stared blankly for a moment. At first, he didn't understand what his master meant. He repeated the words twice before he suddenly understood. He said respectfully, "This disciple understands." Gu Shengyin smiled in satisfaction. Returning to the small courtyard, Gu Shengyin had Gu Yensui pack up some necessities. She then called for the 3 servants to follow her. The 4 people and 1 soul quietly left Dongyun City. But before Gu Shengyin left, she didn't forget one thing. Gu Yensui didn't know this. A day after they left Dongyun City, rumors spread all over Dongyun City that the Chow family's 4th young Miss Jojo's strength had increased because she cultivated a demonic art. Many people believed this without a doubt. Otherwise, how could a useless person who couldn't cultivate suddenly surpass the other young masters and young misses of the Chow family and become a Qi disciple stage 7 expert overnight? Chapter 10:18. Gu Shengyin and Gu Yensui's next stop was a very remote valley. Gu Shengyin had asked the system to investigate this place. The geographical location was excellent, with mountains and water and abundant spiritual energy. The key was that the location was hidden, and almost no one had ever found it. The 3 people who followed them were very puzzled by their master's decision to come to this place. In their opinion, it was already very good to live and eat well in Dongyun City. Why would he come to such a remote place? But Gu Yensui just kept a straight face and made the 2 big men spend a day and a night building a sturdy wooden house. "Okay, you can leave now," Gu Yensui said to the 3 people. The 3 people looked at each other, not understanding the meaning of his words. Gu Yensui tore the death contract into pieces in front of the 3 people. "From now on, you are free." The 3 people reacted. The 2 big men were obviously a little excited. They knelt down on the spot and kowtowed 3 times to Gu Yensui. The cook seemed a little reluctant, but seeing Gu Yensui's expression, she didn't say anything. She also knelt down and kowtowed, then left. These 3 people, after walking out of the valley, would forget their memories of Gu Yensui. "In the next 1.5 years, I will teach you wholeheartedly. After you are 10 years old, I will send you to the Tongtian Pavilion to study," Gu Shengyin said. Gu Yensui was a little puzzled. "Master, I don't understand." You can teach me everything, so why should I go to the Tongtian Pavilion? He knew that the Tongtian Pavilion was one of the biggest forces in the cultivation world. Moreover, the Tongtian Pavilion was different from other forces. Other sects, such as the Sword Sect and the Green Cloud Sect, were all closed off. Once you entered, you became a member of that sect and couldn't leave for the rest of your life. Otherwise, you would be regarded as a traitor. The Tongtian Pavilion, on the other hand, was a place similar to a college. As long as one's age and aptitude met the requirements, they would be able to enter the Tongtian Pavilion to study until they reached a certain level. When the elders of the Tongtian Pavilion felt that they no longer needed to study there, they could leave. This was a very free place. Hearing Gu Yensui's words, Gu Shengyin smiled and said, "Yen Sui, I can teach you the most profound techniques and the most efficient cultivation methods. But I can't bring you friends. In the end, I'm just one person. I can't give you what you need in the future by myself." For some reason, Gu Yensui felt a little disappointed when he heard this. In his heart, he thought that he and his master would live like this for the rest of their lives. There would only be the two of them. His master would teach him, and he would study diligently. He felt that this was already very good. But since his master wanted him to learn more things, he decided to go. Gu Shengyin took out a jade slip from the purple heaven ring and gave it to Gu Yensui. "This is the technique that I cultivated in the past, the purple heaven art. Even in the ancient times 10,000 years ago, it was the top technique." When she said this, there was a faint trace of pride in her tone. In the current cultivation world, I dare to say that even the strongest sword sect doesn't have a cultivation technique that can compare to it. There was a reason for her to be so arrogant. It was because this purple heaven art was created by Jinghong Fairy. Gu Yensui's blood boiled when he heard his master's tone. Very good. Gu Shengyin glanced at her disciple, whose eyes seemed to be burning, and felt very satisfied. Young people should have hot blood and drive. Today's update is over. See you all in the morning. Chapter 1019. Nightfall. Gu Yensui had already fallen asleep. There was a thin white chain in front of his chest, with a very ordinary-looking ring attached to it. This was the purple heaven ring. It was Gu Yensui's own idea to not wear it. He treasured this ring more than Gu Shengyin. He said that if he wore it on his finger and someone took a fancy to it, he wouldn't be able to protect himself. It would be troublesome. The reason why the purple heaven ring had returned to its ordinary appearance was also for the same purpose of concealment. What he didn't notice was that in this silent darkness, the ring in front of his chest was emitting a layer of purple light. Then, a very weak light flowed out from the ring, condensing into an illusory figure in the air. The illusory figure wasn't very clear. It flickered in and out of existence, and in the darkness, it was a bit strange. But if you looked at it, you wouldn't find it strange. Instead, you would be captivated by the beauty of the illusory figure. Even though you couldn't see her face clearly, just the grace she displayed with every movement was enough to make all the beauties in the world pale in comparison. The Jinghong Fairy. With the name Jinghong, how could it not be stunning? Gu Shengyin had never told Gu Yensui that she could actually come out. She just couldn't go too far from the purple heaven ring. But with her divine sense, it didn't make much of a difference to Gu Shengyin whether she could come out or not. She had only come out of the purple heaven ring on a whim. "System, how is Jojo?" she asked. The system gave her the most recent news. Rumors of Jojo cultivating a demonic cultivation technique have spread throughout Eastern Cloud City. The Chow family also heard the news. They called people back to investigate carefully, but they didn't find anything. This was within Gu Shengyin's expectations. It would be strange if the Chow family was able to find the inheritance left behind by a spirit-severing stage cultivator. And then, she was more concerned about what happened next. The Chow family would not let them off so easily. The system's reply was very impressive. The Chow family did not let this matter rest. Chow Chow's father, the Chow family patriarch, placed her under house arrest in the courtyard and forced her to reveal the secret of her sudden increase in strength. Gu Shengyin smiled. She knew that the Chow family was rotten to the core. They must have wanted to question Jojo for a long time, but they never found a suitable excuse. And Gu Shengyin happened to give them an excuse. That's right, Gu Shengyin didn't expect that Jojo would be able to find traces of practicing the devil path cultivation method. What happened next was also within Gu Shengyin's expectations. Jojo would never tell them what happened to her. She could only grit her teeth and say that she didn't know anything. The head of the Chow family was also a cold-hearted person. In order to make her talk, he even tortured his own daughter. Jojo suffered a lot of inhumane torture. The last news she got was that she killed the Foundation establishment cultivator guarding her and escaped. Her whereabouts were unknown. The Chow family is now looking for Jojo all over the city, but there's no result. Gu Shengyin asked, "Can you find her location?" The system's body lit up. "No problem." Gu Shengyin laughed. "Then you can continue to give the Chow family a big present." Gu Shengyin said, "Even if you're just a little girl, don't blame me for bullying you." Chapter 10:20. Someone was chasing after her again. Jojo was hiding in a haystack in the backyard of a farmer's house. When she heard the sound of people outside, she gritted her teeth and dragged her battered body away again. She didn't know what was going on, but every time she moved to a different place, within 2 hours, there would be people from the Chow family chasing after her. How could it be so coincidental that she was found so quickly every time? Jojo's heart was filled with a sense of fear. This feeling, it was as if there was an invisible eye staring at her. No matter where she was hiding, he would be able to find her at a glance. It's impossible, she comforted herself. Her body was almost numb. She was lynched in the Chow family, so her body was already covered with all kinds of scars. These 2 days, she was so tired that she didn't have any time to recover. Some of the hideous wounds were even infected and suppurated. The burning pain kept her extremely tired mind awake. She couldn't let them catch her. This was her only belief. As long as she could escape, Jojo swore that she would repay the Chow family well. Gu Shengyin had the system monitor Jojo's movements at all times, and slowly sat down on a chair. Although it was said to be sitting, it was actually just an action. Anyway, she didn't have a physical body now, so those things that existed were meaningless to her. Gu Yensui faintly opened his eyes when he was half asleep, and then he saw the most beautiful scene he had ever seen in his life. In the darkness, there was a glowing shadow sitting quietly beside him. He couldn't see her face, but he was inexplicably sure that this person was very beautiful. "I must be dreaming, otherwise how could I see a fairy?" Gu Yensui was in a daze for a moment, and then he closed his eyes again and fell asleep. He didn't know that he had lost a chance to see his master's true appearance. When Gu Yensui woke up the next day, he was still a bit confused when he looked at his surroundings. He couldn't get used to it these days, and when he woke up and saw this unfamiliar environment, he felt a bit awkward. "Go and do your morning exercises when you're awake." The old voice sounded in his mind. "Yes, master," he said respectfully. Turning around, he narrowed his eyes. Gu Yensui remembered the short and shocking dream last night. The fairy in his dream seemed to be sitting on this chair. He shook his head and walked out the door. Time passed quickly in the valley. As for Gu Yensui, his days were cultivation, eating, and sleeping. As for Gu Shengyin, she did even less. She watched Gu Yensui cultivate and paid attention to Jojo. Half a month later, Jojo still managed to escape from Eastern Cloud City. She seemed to have confirmed that there really was someone who could discover her whereabouts immediately. As long as she stayed in Eastern Cloud City, she would be tracked. Therefore, she turned her gaze to the outside. The Chow family could be considered a large aristocratic family in Eastern Cloud City, but outside, no one would pay attention to them. Gu Shengyin couldn't help but admit that this girl was very smart. Her mind didn't seem like that of a teenage girl. She also silently cursed the Chow family for being trash. Such a large family, even with someone providing them with information, they couldn't even catch a little chi condensation girl. No wonder this family didn't have a single golden core cultivator after so many years. It was their time. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.